Initially, when I entered college, Western Baptist, it was back then, Corbin now, I really had no idea what I was going to do with life. I was really immature as far as planning for adulthood and life beyond college. I really didn't have any idea what I was going to do. As I'm going through college, I always had a really high interest in history. For some reason, it just always intrigued me. And when I met my future wife, Ruth, sophomore year of college, I knew, as we talked, we found out she had went to King's High School in Seattle, and she's really focused on Christian education. And that sort of introduced me to it for the first time, because I had no idea there were such things as Christian schools before that. And the more we talked and stuff, the more I said, that sounds very interesting. I think I'm going to pursue a little bit about the, education maybe and teaching. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like that's where I was supposed to spend my life. God wanted me to be there doing that. And so I graduated from Western, went to Cal State Hayward to get a 5th year teaching credential work. And during that time, I was drafted. And so that took me away from it for a while. But when I got my draft notice, I knew that there was a exemption, draft exemption for teachers. And I was married then. My wife says, well, there's a Christian school, in Tacoma. And if you got a job there, you could avoid the draft. So we came up here on one weekend, and I talked to Dr. Bond at the time, applied. This was spring of 1968. And I really had no idea what I was doing, but I talked to Dr. Bond, and he actually offered me a contract, teaching 7 different classes, driving the bus before and after school, and filling in as an interim pastor in a small country church. And God knew exactly what he was doing with me, and he says, no. So the draft board would refuse to accept that kind of thing. They drafted me anyway. And Ruth and I have talked about this many times since, that if I had started in teaching at that point in time, I'd have probably lasted a couple of months, and it'd be the end of it. I would never even been able to complete the year. It'd been overwhelming to me. So God took me away from it for a couple of years, 3 years actually, 2 years in the Army, then a year afterward, but I was working, and then I was had another opportunity to teach at a school in Concord, California, and took that, and that was the start of actual teaching in Christian school for me. And I've always felt, from that point on, I always knew that there's no other place I could be comfortable and happy working. Okay, first year at TBS, I taught Bible, U.S. history, and world history. 2 classes of each during the day. Actually, I think it was freshman Bible to begin with. And for about first 10 years, 10, 11 years, that's all I did, those 3. Then the athletic director left, and so I took that job, because I actually did athletic directing down in California. I was down there, so I had some background in that. So I took the athletic director's job, which was an unusual situation, because by then I also worked a part-time job on weekends. And so now I'm teaching from teaching morning until lunchtime. So I have 4 classes to teach. I have two class periods after lunch, which I'm supposed to do athletic directing job, and then I have a PE class at the end of the day. So I had a narrow framework of time to work with the athletic director. And so I'm doing that. At the same time, I was coaching varsity basketball and working part-time. And again, I thought, wow, this is pretty taxing. So I did that for 6 years. And then I came to the conclusion that I was doing nothing well at that time. You know, everything was sort of haphazard, thrown together last minute. So I said, the one thing I dislike really of all these jobs, I dislike athletic director. I am not an administrator. I'm not good at that. It's a lot of pressure. I'm always wondering, did I forget to do something for today's game? You know, I forget to remind or contact the officials we have a change of location for baseball or something like that. It was just it was not an enjoyable position. So I said, I'll resign from the athletic director job. Went back to just teaching full time, and also left a year or so later. Left coaching the basketball team, and just focused on teaching then. I like to keep my hand in various sports because I love sports. So I did JV basketball for a while. I did middle school basketball for a while, and I coached baseball off and on over the years. And gradually at the end started to reduce my class load and phase out in teaching too. My introduction to TBS students. First year at TBS, at that time we had parent-teacher fellowships once a month in the gym. And so of course, virtually all parents, high school kids in particular, were there. And the kids knew that all the teachers were there. So they knew we were not at home. And that was a period in history where TP parties were big-time events. That was their weekend fun, at least for Christian school kids. So my wife and I came. It was our first meeting. So it's right at the beginning of October, I think. And we come and go through the activities and stuff, get in the car and go home. We get home and drive up to our house and see streaming from all the shrubs and trees, toilet paper everywhere. And it's a shock to us because we'd never had that happen before. So we get out of the car, we just sort of stand there looking at it, wondering what to do. And 2 cars come driving down the street, and as they drive by our house, kids are all leaning out the window yelling, "The British are coming, the British are coming." So it's my U.S. history class. All the girls basically in that class had come by, and they're making a joke of us. But what a really neat thing was, as they pass on by, finish their chants of the British, drive around the block, come back, pull up right next to our house, so they all stop and get out, and they start helping us clean up the toilet paper. And laughing and joking, of course, how much fun it was that they got us like that. But I thought that's really something that the kids wouldn't do it maliciously. They were just having fun. And fun to them also involved making sure that the other people were having fun too. So they made sure it was an enjoyable experience for us as well as getting us. Especially for maybe the first 20 years. I had a reputation for being a pretty harsh teacher. My attitude was that if it's not a challenge, it's not worth doing. So tests tended to be a significant challenge for most students. In fact, I took the approach that there should be 1 or 2 questions on a test that only this exceptional student has a chance to get right. You separate the real diligent student from the, one doesn't want to quite do that much work. So anyway, people said, it's impossible to pass Mr. Andersen's test. Well, rarely did anybody fail, but it sounded good, I guess, to them. And then we had quizzes quite often in class. And quizzes would typically end with a question that wasn't from the book or the notes. Like something like, what's today's secret word? Or the color of the day. I'm thinking of a number and it's somewhere in this room. Yeah, what number am I thinking of? So we had some of those kinds of questions. And it's odd to me that there were a number of students who never figured out that those questions didn't count. They panicked. And some questions found their way onto tests that were sort of similar. One of my favorite questions I remember was, who was more alike, Caesar or Pompey, or vice versa? And I remember some students getting very serious as they read that question and raised their hands and, Mr. Andersen, what am I supposed to answer here? What does this mean? I said, just think about it. You think about it, it'll come to you eventually. But I don't know about students. I had a lot of fun with tests and quizzes. I'm not so sure it was totally fun for them, but they look back on it now and they say probably, yeah, that was fun. Okay, well actually finances were, as you probably are aware, finances are typically a problem with Christian school teachers. And when I first came to TBS, Dr. Bond, the superintendent, said, well, what do you need to live on? That was the question. So you would be paid based on what you needed to survive, so to speak. And I miscalculated a little bit, coming from California. I thought, well, everything's be cheaper here in Washington. Cost of living would be much lower. Well, it really wasn't. But anyway, so I always had a summer job. The first few years, I got a job through parents who were willing to help, But it was about the third year we were here, and there was a recession, and there just weren't summer jobs. Nothing was available. And my brother-in-law had a connection down on at the port of Tacoma with the Longshoremen's Union, where he would go down there, and if there were extra jobs after all their regular men had been sent out, then they would take people off the street and give them a job for the day. So we would do that every day pretty much, and like once a week I might get sent out and get to work. But it got more and more difficult as time went on to get any kind of job. And I remember for like 2 or 3 weeks there, nothing had been available. And so we continued trying. So I went down one day and we're sitting there in this long row of seats where the people who are not the regulars sit waiting for a job. And the dispatcher comes out and he has a whole handful of dispatchers. He's going to send a number of people out, and he comes down the list, and the row I'm sitting, the guy right next to me on my left, he looks at him, hands him a dispatch and says, go off to work this place or that place. Looks at me, and then turns to the guy on the other side of me and hands him a dispatch and says, go off to work. And he goes down the list for some other people and sends them, and he's all done, and I'm still sitting there wondering what's going on. And most of the other guys are off working. And I was sitting there depressed, actually. I'm sitting there, why am I still sitting here? And they're all working. I'm driving home a little later, and I'm really getting more and more upset. And I finally, I'm saying, God, I don't know what you're doing. What are you trying to do to me? I can't figure this out. And so it was a low point, spiritually speaking, and in my life as far as knowing that can I depend on God to do this for me or not? Is He going to meet our needs, my family and my needs, or not? And so I get home, and after a couple of weeks, it's a little bit later in the summer, another teacher from school calls me and says, hey, I've got a job. I found a job at a warehouse, local warehouse, and I think they might hire you too. They're looking for more people. So the next day I was down there and talked to the superintendent, and he says, yeah, I got a job for you. It's a frozen food warehouse. During the summer hours, you work whenever we want you to work, many hours as we need you, and there's quite a bit during the summer. During the school year, I know what teaching is like. I was once a teacher. So you can work whenever you choose to work during the school year. Christmas vacation, you want to work? Fine, come down and work. I mean, nothing could have fit into my schedule better than that did. It was perfect. And not only that, it offered me benefits that I would never have gotten anyplace else. I got medical benefits. I accumulated vacation time as a part-time employee. Once a year, I got coverage, enough hours in to get coverage for dental for my children. My two daughters both got, what are they, oral braces and stuff, yeah, through all totally paid for by this dental coverage. And financially, as far as my bills were concerned, this was a job that paid well. Exactly, and I started working there in 1981 and worked there for 21 years until I found out that I had worked enough hours each year to qualify for retirement benefits. And under a plan that the union had established there, my age plus the years I had worked and other things that they actually included, time I was in the military, they included that as work time. Time I worked in a warehouse in California, they included that. Put it all together, and I was able to retire and just then dedicate myself to school. And I never anticipated that when I started. I said, at the end of the road, you look back and say, God knew exactly what He was doing. He wasn't leaving me out on a branch to break off and fall and crash. He had the whole plan in His mind the whole time, and it was far better than what I could have anticipated. Wow. Okay. You can address that from two different perspectives, I think. One of them is extracurricular activities. The kind of general participation by the student body and the participation of families and parents in what goes on outside the classroom really overwhelmed me with the kind of support you got. One experience, and this is one I probably the highlight of my experience, I guess, is that one year the basketball team went to the state tournament in Spokane. We were playing in the semifinals and the finals that year. But in the semifinal game, a Friday night, we were playing in the Spokane Coliseum, which no longer exists, but it was a compact arena, held 7,000 or 8,000 people probably, and it was standing room only for our game. And I looked back, and the stands behind our bench, and there's nothing but TBS people. Nothing but TBS behind us. There were people whose kids were in elementary school who'd brought their whole family over to the tournament. There was a whole row of junior high boys. The whole junior high boys basketball team was sitting together in one row, and their families spread around. There were alumni from the very first year that TBS had a high school there. I wild guess, but I'm sure there were 1,000 people, TBS people in that arena that night. And you could barely communicate onto the court back and forth because it was so loud. It was just an amazing, amazing experience. TBS people supported their kids in an overwhelming way. And that's true. I remember going to, when we started playing football, first year we played football. We had as many people in the stands as everybody else in our league put together. People followed us to every other stadium around wherever we were playing. Didn't matter what was 100 miles away. TBS fans, or more TBS fans there than there were home fans. And that was really a reputation of school, at both basketball and football. Wherever we went, we outnumbered the home team in support. It was just an amazing thing to see how the families, the people here, even, as I said, alumni, they were just always there, cheering on, supporting. It was really an amazing thing to see. That semifinal game was we went into that game. We're playing Rainier from down here in Bayonne, Rainier High School, and it was midway through the second quarter, and we were down by 19 points. It's at the moment it seemed totally overwhelming. No, but high school game down 19, you just don't survive that. But we sort of stopped, took time out, regrouped. The reason they were ahead so far is that they simply couldn't miss a shot. They just run down, shoot a three-pointer, swish, and it seemed like they couldn't miss. And but we regrouped and just chipped away, down 10 at halftime, down by 4 at the end of 3 quarters. Caught them with about a minute and a half to go, and won by 2 points. And I said, those kids on that team, their discipline, their grit, determination, they would not give up. And there's one kid on that team, John Marcelia, one of our guards. During soccer, end of the soccer season, he was a goalie, and he dove for a ball, and he jammed his wrist and cracked it. But he wouldn't go to a doctor because he knew if he did, they put a cast on it, he would miss the basketball season. So he played the whole basketball season with this painful wrist. And every once in a while, he'd dive for a ball, and he'd come out like holding his wrist. And during the game we were playing at the Coliseum there, he'd come over occasionally and say, "Coach, I got to go to the locker room." He'd have to come out of the game, put ice on his wrist for a couple minutes, come back, say, "When you're ready, I'm ready when you need me." And that's sort of typical. I mean, the character level of kids that we're playing. There were some teachers here that I had a pretty intense interaction with, and the one most notable is Keith Plunkett. He was the Bible teacher here for 25, 27 years, something like that, and he and I had an ongoing game time, so to speak. Okay. Well, one year I decided to get even with him for something. I don't know what it was, but over the weekend. Well, first I should start. Keith was a unbelievably intense Ohio State Buckeye fan. Okay. On his desk was Brutus, the Ohio State mascot. And so one weekend I came in to get something at school and thought, this is a perfect opportunity. Keith's not around. And Brutus got kidnapped. And I shouldn't say I left, the kidnapper left a ransom note on his door. And for the next week and a half, roughly, every morning when Keith Plunkett came to school, there was another ransom note. something additional demands like chocolate chip cookies or muffins or something, that the kidnapper would enjoy. And finally, this kidnapper was satisfied, and on another weekend, Brutus found his way back to the desk, and a reunion occurred. And I don't know. I guess this is a revelation. I don't think Keith Plunkett ever knew who took Brutus, how he got back. But now the world knows. Well, one student, actually there are several. I mentioned two students events that sort of I always have stuck with me. I mean, there are a lot of them, actually. The more I think about it, the more come on. But I think way back, one of the things I've always thought was wonderful about TBS was graduation. Graduation, commencement ceremony here is an amazing thing. I've been to graduations at other schools, other Christian schools, and they simply don't stack up to the level of what we have. We do something that's really neat here, more so than any other school I've ever seen. And I think when we added the end of commencement prayer over graduates, that kind of thing, yeah, it's just very special. Well, anyway, probably mid '80s, graduation takes place, and the graduates at the end go back and they toss their caps, and they go out in the back of the gym there and mill around, and I'm walking out the back door, and there's this girl and her boyfriend just graduated, and the girl is standing there crying. And she sees me and she says, "You're going to forget us? The moment we leave here, you're going to forget all about us." I couldn't help but smile a little bit. I don't think so. And so this is a message actually to Jane Davis. We've never forgotten you, Jane. And yeah, the other event is in the classroom. Tara Lehman she wanted to go out. She liked being outdoors. And so she would come into class in the spring, and this almost every day of the spring till school was out. She'd come in, so we'd sit down, the bell would ring, and she'd raise her hand and say, "Mr. Andersen, can we go outside today? Mr. Andersen, can we go to the courtyard today?" And I had an appropriate answer each day, like, well, it's only 68 today, and I can't go outside unless it's 70 degrees. Or it's 75 out today, and it's a little bit warm for me outside. So I had some kind of answer as to why we couldn't do it. So after about 50 days of questioning, we get to the end of the year. We're in the last week of school, finals week. And so she raised her hand and asked the question. And said, "You know what, Tara? I think we can go out to the field, sit in the field and in the grass. Next week we'll do that." Which, of course, school was out next week. I could not have found anything in life to do which would have been more fulfilling, which would have given me more satisfaction. I mean, I know I'm not the best teacher in the world, and some students didn't care for the way I approached things. Some parents didn't care for the way I approached things. But I think that most students, by the end of the time they were in my class, left and said, he pushed me to learn all I could learn. And that was the goal. And I don't think there's any better experience for a student to be in a Christian school that promotes and seeks to advance their relationship with God, their spiritual condition, and the way TBS does. And we have had a significant impact, I think, on our community and on the Christian world in general because of the education students have gotten here at TBS, and that so many parents have been willing to sacrifice so much to make sure their kids got through that.